this episode of the Jesus Agenda, we break down the recent election, take a look at the implications of the results. We're going to tackle Christian nationalism and the left's hypocritical criticism of the same. And we're also going to ask, do science and faith go hand in hand, or are they eternally in opposition to one another? I'm Chad Kyler. This is my friend and co-host Steve Mannion. And this is the Jesus Agenda, the podcast where politics, religion, and culture come face to face with Jesus and his agenda. Is anybody on the planet not talking about the election last week?
I don't know of anybody. I mean, it's all over the news. It's in worldwide news. And I don't know. A lot of people, most people in the United States are happy about the results.
At least 76 million are.
Yeah, there's some that are sane and disagreed with it, but aren't having nervous breakdowns, and there's another little bit that are having nervous breakdowns.
There are some nervous breakdowns happening. We were watching the news the other day, and there's some women that are going crazy. They're shaving their heads. I saw one woman was saying, "Leave your husband and come over here. We'll bake cookies."
I did see that Rosie O'Donnell is joining the sex strike.
Really?
So
was anybody having sex with Rosie O'Donnell?
The Babylon Bee put out, Rosie O'Donnell continues her 36-year sex strike.
It's the longest strike ever. And it's interesting because good things are already happening in the world. I've been seeing headlines, right? Qatar kicks Hamas leaders out of Qatar, right? Yeah. They're going home. Hamas is calling for an immediate ceasefire and an end to conflict. You've got the EU saying that they want that in order to avoid the tariffs that they know Trump is going to bring, maybe they'll start buying natural gas here in the United States. You got Putin coming out and saying, and I love the interview that he gave, where he says, and I've said this to people before, that politics in Russia are not like politics here. And this is proof of that. He comes out and he says, I really think that Trump took it like a man. When he got shot, he sees him as masculine. He got shot at and he stood up, and, that's impressive to him. And now he's saying that he might end his war against the U.S. dollar and start selling Russian oil in U.S. dollars
all of a sudden.
And so I'm just thinking, that there's a lot of optimism going forward, a lot of positivity going forward in terms of, what could be accomplished and what could be coming down the pike over the next couple of years.
Yeah, there is. But on the other hand, we're talking about how the left is really not learning their lesson from this. I just saw a clip of the View from, I think, just a few days ago. And I mean, if you want to watch something amazing, watch the day after the election. But more recent than that, the one lady in the View started to make somewhat a rational point about why the Democrats might have lost. Yeah. And she started saying it, why they might have lost, and she got interrupted by the one lady. She's like, "No, it's misogyny."
Yeah.
That's the whole reason that they lost was because of misogyny. We have some stats here that the Catholic vote, Trump won by 15 points. Evangelicals, 22% of the electorate was evangelicals. And get this, though. It was the lowest evangelical turnout for Trump, period. And is the lowest evangelical turnout since Romney in 2012.
Well, that goes with what we were saying a week ago about the Barna research. Yeah. 32 million church-going Christians were just
not turn any election. And but the part that's really amazing to the Democrats is they can't understand, and they think it's misogyny is the answer to this, is that they did way underperformed with Hispanics.
Right.
The GOP set a record. Despite the platform of mass deportation, the GOP set a record for Hispanic vote. Right? That is dumbfounding. It was a 33-point swing. Trump won Miami-Dade County.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's dumbfounding. That's amazing. Crazy. And also the county with the densest Hispanic population in the United States is Starr County, Texas. And Trump is the first Republican candidate to win there since, get this, 1892.
That's insane.
And so 97% of that county is Hispanic, and they overwhelmingly went with Trump. But it's called Morning Joe. The first thing they said was, the first thing they said the next morning was, that if Kamala was a white male, she would have won. Yeah. And then they went right into misogyny. And when someone brought up this county, now Hispanics are misogynistic, and Hispanics are now racist.
Yeah.
So they're still doing the same tactic of race warfare.
I think what honestly what they don't understand about the Hispanic population, aside from the religiosity aspect, which is kind of big, is that Hispanics in this country, they're now like 22 or 23% of the U.S. population, somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
And they are steadily moving into the middle class. And a lot of them have already moved into the middle class. Mm-hmm. So now they have these sensitivities to the economy. They have sensitivities to inflation. They have sensitivities to just the general cost of getting along. And that is not something Democrats address well. They cause more problems than they solve when it comes to that. So you've got that factor right there, and then secondarily,
Bernie Sanders said that. He said we abandoned the working class.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And he got flack for saying that.
Well, yeah, and I think there's an argument to be made that historically the Democrats have been better at connecting with the working class. I don't think anybody feels
which they're losing.
Right, but now they're losing because you have a Republican. A guy at the head of the Republican Party who's reshaping the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I watched the RNC and the president of the Teamsters Union came out to speak, and it's not like it was all, fluff and good times in his speech. I think he said something like the last time a Teamster president came to the RNC was like 1918. Mm-hmm. Some ridiculous amount of time. Mm-hmm. So I think we're definitely seeing a shift, but specifically with Hispanics, even on the border, people that are in this country, what you're seeing now are second and third generation Hispanic people that have come from places like Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States, right? Mm-hmm. And they're second and third generation now, and they don't want people getting in illegal either. Right. Because they're Americans.
Yeah, they're American,
and they are looking at it our way. And I think Democrats just totally missed that. They just figured they took their vote for granted is what it boiled down to. But to wipe it all out and say it's because they're now here's the thing about why I don't buy into the misogyny, aside from the fact that it's just stupid. Mm-hmm. But why I don't buy into the misogyny accusation. The Center for American Progress is a liberal think tank, right? Mm-hmm. They've shown just recently within surveys that Hispanics are more open to the leadership of women than most other cultures.
Mm-hmm. They are, yeah.
So that's ridiculous to accuse the 47% of the Hispanic male population that voted for Trump of misogyny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the Democrats can't possibly, I really think Americans and Hispanic and all of them are tired of being. I think they think we're stupid.
Right.
Okay. They think Americans are stupid. They have become the elitist party.
Sure.
And they think the Americans are stupid. There's some who believe all the lies the mainstream media is telling them, but most Americans started to see through it.
Right.
And then when they're told, Americans are tired of being told that they're racist. They're tired of being told that they're just name the thing, the issue that they keep throwing out, but they do not learn. They're still doubling down on this message that, I can't believe Americans voted for a criminal, racist guy who said he was going to line up people in a firing squad, and of course those things are all lies, right? And he's literally Hitler. We have that, all of this stuff, and Americans are tired of it. I think they overplayed their hand, which Satan always eventually does.
Sure,
he overplays his hand.
Sure,
and they finally found. I was beginning to wonder if there was a breaking point for Americans. I was like, seriously, is there a breaking point where we snap out of this?
I was kind of worried about it myself because I was starting to think that when you look at the social development of Europe and America, right? We have a lot in common, but we have something that's diametrically opposed to it. That is that all the Puritans left Europe and came here. Seriously, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't take into account that our culture is, even though there's so many different ethnic groups who've come here over the years, our culture is at its foundation a Puritan society. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's why if you watch European commercials, you're likely to see a pair of naked boobies on a commercial for soda. You're not going to see that in the United States commercial. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. Why? Because we still have, as far to the left as we've gone, we still have Puritan sensibilities, right? Mm-hmm. And now I'm not knocking that. I'm actually saying that's that's kind of a nice little moral guide, right? But I think the problem is that as I was watching the culture continually shift to the left, I'm like, where is the line going to be? And I think we finally found the line. It's not just that people are tired of being called racist. They're tired of the woke agenda altogether.
Yeah.
If Jake wants to put...
No one really believes men can become women.
No, nobody believes it. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. I think this is where the miscalculation comes in. If Jake wants to put a dress on and call himself Janet, fine. I don't care that Jake wants to prance around in a tutu in his living room or even at the grocery store. But as soon as you tell me that I have to call him Janet...
Don't ask us to play along with your fantasy.
I'm not buying into your delusion. And that's what's happened. We are now being told that if we don't buy into the delusion, if we don't support what people feel about themselves in every context that they express it, then we're the bad guys.
Yeah.
People are tired of hearing that.
But the left has not learned it.
No, of course
they are
not.
doubling down, and they're going to
let them double down. They'll just keep losing.
Exactly. For the next 4 years, what you're going to see is them looking at every opportunity to hit Trump, to lie about him. If anything he does is going to be racist, xenophobic, homophobic, anything he does, they're going to triple down on this. And they're, like you said, I think they're just going to keep losing more.
I think it's going to be over the top for 2 years, right? Because they have a chance to win back the House. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're going to win the House this time. I was checking some of the returns earlier today. It was the Republicans had 216. But then I saw that Trump appointed Stefaniak here in New York to be the next UN ambassador. So it's down to 215. But that says to me that they're pretty confident they're going to win the 3 seats they need to hold the House. There's 10 elections that have not been called. Out of those, 5 of them are Republican incumbents. So they have to be pretty confident that at least they're going to win in 3 of those. Or flip 3 of the Democrat incumbent seats, right? And so I'm pretty sure they're going to hold the House. So in 2 years, it's going to be nonstop. You're going to end up with they've called the race for McCormick in Pennsylvania, so that puts the Senate up to 53 to 46. Mm-hmm. Bob Casey's fighting it. He's going to take it to court. Right now, it's 52-47.
I thought we had the most secure elections.
Yeah, right. And McCormick has a 70,000 vote lead. So, I mean, it's narrow, obviously, but that's a lot. I mean, you would really have to get a lot of votes in a recount, and I don't know how you'd get 70,000. Mm-hmm. That's pretty hard. So you've got Casey fighting it, but whether Casey loses or not doesn't matter. It's 52-47 now. It's going to be 53-47. Mm-hmm. So they're going to have control of everything, and obviously they have a mandate to implement their agenda. But for the next 2 years, Democrats are going to go like crazy.
If I'm not real confident in the Congress, boldly implementing a
I'm not either.
That Trump
I'm not either. But I guess what I'm saying is they have two, and that's judging. That's a fair thing because 2017 it's the same situation.
Yeah,
they had everything, and they were very conservative in the wrong way on what they did. Yeah. They really didn't do a lot. I think, however, if you get the right people in the right places, like for example, if Rick Scott ends up being the majority leader in the Senate, you've got a Trump guy as the majority leader in the Senate, he's going to push the agenda. Yeah. And I think you got Mike Johnson in the House, he's a Trump guy. So if you have those 2 guys in those positions of leadership, at least you're going to have the 2 guys you need to try to push through the agenda. And so I think we might see a little bit of a difference, but the main thing, like you said, is you're going to have the opposition going crazy for 2 years because they have to make them look as bad as they can possibly make them look in order to try to flip some of those seats on the House side.
Mm-hmm. And it's up to all of you to, if you hear anything, including about the progressives, you got to evaluate, look at these things, look into them. Did Trump actually say he was going to line up Marjorie Taylor Greene and shoot him with a firing squad? If you listen to a quote, he did not say that. Yeah. That if you just blindly believe any media source, right, you gotta look into these things.
They're still saying that the last when the thing happened in Virginia, that he said there were nice people on both sides of the line.
Yeah.
He didn't say it that way. That's not what he was talking about.
He'll just believe
and they've played the full quote since then, but media pundits still say it. it's kind of nuts to me. Like, he says enough crazy stuff that you can prove is true, right?
Yeah, you don't need to make it up.
You don't have to make stuff up today. But who else lost before we move on? Who else lost? Hollywood lost. They came out in droves to support Kamala. Music entertainers lost. They came out. It's
amazing how so many of them said they were going to leave the country. I don't think they've left yet.
I called some people in Canada, and nobody
he was literally
has shown
Hitler.
up.
So
nobody has shown up. Lady Gaga is still here.
He's going to line them up and shoot them in a firing squad. So you think they'd want to leave?
You'd think they'd want to get out, but it's just not happening. So hopefully we'll see. What some changes are. At the very least, for us as Christians, this is a reprieve, and we can look at it as that. And ultimately, we all have political ideas, and we don't always agree with each other as Christians, but the two main things that we should agree on is how we vote, whatever way we vote. We should be going into that voting booth thinking, what is the best, who is the person or the group of people who are going to produce the policies that will be best for my neighbor? And secondly, what is best for the gospel? Mm-hmm. And what we mean by what is best for the gospel is not what's going to promote the gospel, but what is going to allow the gospel the greatest freedom to go out and do what the gospel has to do. And so I think we're going to have at least a 4-year reprieve, like we did, I think, even under the first Trump administration, where the culture is a little less tense, and maybe the politics are a little less focused on, passing things that are detrimental to the spread of the gospel, detrimental to the healing that God wants to do in people's lives. So I think we have something special from the Babylon Bee that we wanted to talk about Kamala Harris.
Yeah, so the Babylon Bee put out an article that says, and this is the title, Kamala calls for a peaceful transfer of power to Adolf Hitler. And that's what it says. In a stirring concession speech following last night's election loss, Kamala Harris announced she would work to ensure a peaceful transition of power to the man she called Adolf Hitler for the last year. After losing a lopsided contest to former President Donald Trump, who she spent years warning Americans was the gravest threat to democracy, and by the way, we are a republic, not a democracy,
right?
Harris vowed to accept his victory and help the man she told voters was a ruthless totalitarian dictator take control of the highest office in the land. It's my responsibility to make sure, this is her talking, it's my responsibility to make sure this tyrannical despot assumes power, Harris told the crowd of supporters after officially conceding the race. Though he will end freedom itself in this country, imprison anyone who disagrees with him, systematically murder all women, and go door to door kicking everyone's dogs, I promise to make sure there is a peaceful transition of power. Obviously, she didn't say that in that quote, but she said that kind of stuff over time. The media hailed Harris's brilliance in the leadership she displayed while conceding to a man who is literally Hitler. Such a powerful moment, MSNBC's Rachel Maddow said. Kamala Harris is showing us what American resolve truly is, willingly handing over control of the country to someone she spent several years describing as the most dangerous villain this nation has ever seen. So inspiring. And it goes on and on. I encourage you to check the article out, but... Yeah. It's true. They said if this guy's really the most dangerous person who's going to line people up with firing squads, and he's literally Adolf Hitler, then why did she concede to him and peacefully concede and hand over the power?
Yeah, right.
And I would run out of this country if it literally Adolf Hitler.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like, why are you saying so? They don't believe it.
Well, of course they don't believe it. It's rhetoric, right? Because look back to World War II era. Jews were getting on boats to flee Europe as quickly as they possibly could because they saw the danger.
And by the way, that's actually literally hateful rhetoric.
Right, absolutely.
Like the stuff they accuse Trump of, this is literally, it's slander, it's hateful rhetoric.
It kind of makes me wonder, if they even know what Nazi... Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, now... Just what was it, a couple nights ago, you had that event at the soccer game in Amsterdam where Dutch Moroccan and Dutch Turkish gangs are literally hunting Jewish fans down, Israeli fans down in the street to beat them up. Mm-hmm. And this is happening like a day or 2 days before the 85th or 86th anniversary of Kristallnacht that happened in Germany.
Yeah.
that is Nazism. That's and by the way, in case you're wondering, the Arabs were complicit with the Nazis. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that necessarily needs to skew our view of current Arab-Israeli conflicts, right? But there were a lot of Arabs who sided with Hitler and with the Nazis. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't surprise me.
And Lutherans, excuse me.
Yeah, no, there were. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So and go see the Bonhoeffer movie to see how the German state church, which is something people need to understand about churches in Europe, it's not like the United States. So the Lutherans in Germany were part of a state apparatus.
Yeah, right.
So that means the pastors were paid by the government and they were government officials and that kind of thing. So it becomes it's a little more I guess complicated, right, than just. I mean, you and I see it black and white. Obviously, Bonhoeffer saw it as black and white too.
He did.
And so please go see that movie. But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of people who were complicit in it. So I'm not surprised that the gangs that were looking for Jews were Muslim gangs, Moroccans and Turkish. While not Arab themselves, there is a Nazi strand that runs through, that they share maybe with some of their antecedents in their faith, at least during that period of time. So, yeah, I don't think I never felt like it was appropriate to refer to any of Trump's rhetoric as Nazi rhetoric. I don't see the comparison.
Of course not.
Yeah, and whenever somebody says it, it just says to me you're completely ignorant of what Nazism really is. Which actually leads us into our next topic, which is Christian nationalism. We've seen a lot of it. A lot of accusations about it, rather. I don't know that we've actually really seen a lot of actual Christian nationalism, but we've seen a lot of people on the left, making these accusations about things being white. And usually they add the word white. They'll say white Christian nationalism, right?
Because it's even worse than.
Because that's even worse than just plain old Christian nationalism.
Because it's whitey.
Because it's whitey to it, yeah. Now, I've been trying to kind of like catch up on this because it's not really something that's in my orbit to even think about this kind of stuff, right? So I've tried to like do some reading about it and see like what are they talking about, and like 9 times out of 10 it seems to me like they're just talking about Christians applying their faith in politics, because Christian nationalism to me, I mean there's basically 2 kinds of it, right? There's the kind that's a little more innocent that wants to just kind of see Christianity fused into the government or vice versa or something like that. But then there's the more militant kind, and we talked about that a little bit last week when we brought up R.J. Rushdoony, and we didn't mention it then, but I looked it up. It's the Chalcedon Foundation. Theirs is more of a dominionist view, right? They want to take over the government and then implement Old Testament law. And then everybody would have to find this Old Testament law, which of course means...
Which is against the First Amendment, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what the extent of that means. Like, does it mean that they'd be taking their sons, their smart aleck sons, out to the gates and stoning them to death? I don't know. Like, I didn't go that far. I just know that those are the 2 kinds of Christian nationalism that I could find. But when you read the critique of those, people who call themselves progressive Christians or the religious left or something like that, that's not what they're critiquing. They're just critiquing, average Joe Christian getting elected to Congress and voting based on their religious commitments.
Yeah, exactly. We have an article here that it's called Christian Nationalism and Veiled Political Ideology from, what's the magazine?
Juicy Ecumenism.
Yeah, and that's exactly, this is quotes from an organization that is very outspoken against Christian nationalism. By the way, I always ask them, what do you mean by Christian nationalism first?
Right,
like you're saying, it means different things.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what Reverend Jim Wallace, and I say Reverend loosely, he ain't a Christian reverend, even though he thinks he is. Founded by a long-time evangelical, that's a very loosely used term there, left activist, Reverend Jim Wallace, the organization is Sojourners, and it characterizes its mission. This is its mission, get this, at working towards establishing social and racial justice. Okay, so their platform, they talk about how asked to define Christian nationalism, panelists from Sojourners identified it as chiefly an ideological and political movement. As such, it is the belief that Christians should propagate their ideology, their biblical worldview, in government, that they shouldn't do that. And that nationalists use Christianity merely as a tool to archive political and cultural dominance. And so what they say later in the article is they think that all people running political leaders, he argued, must be stripped of their religious credibility. They cannot be allowed to wield Christian language for public ends. So, their mission is to bring their worldview of social and racial justice, and they're allowed to bring that into government and push their worldview that they think it's something, and that's fair. They're allowed to have something that they think is for the betterment of society and push for it, right? That's what that's what our elections are for. And then but Christians aren't allowed to do that, right? Because you become a Christian nationalist if you try to bring a biblical worldview and bring it into the cultural.
And the irony, though, is that all these guys are quote-unquote Christians who are saying that their advocacy for social justice and peace and racial reconciliation is rooted in a biblical worldview.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not even just that they can bring their ideas and we can't bring ours. It's that they can bring their perspective on Scripture, but you can't bring your perspective on Scripture.
Right. They don't like what we're the message that we're bringing. It's nothing to do with bringing a worldview and bringing it into the public sphere and voting accordingly. That's what we all do in our country.
Oh, absolutely.
And by the way, I mean, our First Amendment does say that government can pass no laws, Congress can pass no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof of religion, and the separation of church and state thing everybody talk about is nowhere in our founding documents. That comes from Thomas Jefferson, who wrote a letter making the exact other argument that the government should stay out of the church.
Yeah.
But Chad, I personally never met a Christian that thinks we need to do away with the First Amendment and make America a legally Christian.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard it? I never have.
I've never met one personally.
That's true Christian nationalism, as far as I can see.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're talking about with the theonomy, right? Mm-hmm. That's what Rushdoony promoted. And there are people in that camp, but they're a sliver. I mean, they're a minority. I mean, the only time I've ever met one is through a YouTube video or something like that. Like, I've never actually seen one in person, like a real live one in person. Yeah. I think that, and of course, with all ideas, there's a spectrum. I mean, you have somebody, and we talked about this a little bit offline, right? We have somebody like Doug Wilson, for example, in Idaho, or Moscow, Idaho is where he's at, right? He's a guy who is a dominionist, some form of dominionist.
He's brilliant.
But he's not, that's not what he's at. Like, you don't hear him out there advocating, like, take the reins of government and let's just, now he has something like that in his mind. But I wouldn't necessarily say that everything he advocates is Christian nationalism. Yeah. And I really don't think it's fair to say that a Christian should somehow lose their Christian sense and their religious credibility, as Reverend Taylor puts it, in order to vote on a bill.
Yeah.
And part of the reason is that a lot of these issues, and I think we've talked about this before, but that a lot of these issues that have become politicized, for us, at their core, are theological issues. Mm-hmm. Abortion is a great example. When does life begin? That's not a political issue for me. That's a theological issue, because it's rooted in Scripture. It's rooted in Psalm 139. It's rooted in the story of John the Baptist. It's rooted, all of these things. I approach that from that view because that's going to be my lens. Mm-hmm. So if I was in office voting on a bill, for example, to lower or to limit abortions to like the 15th week or whatever, give me a current bill that's out there, I'm going to vote with that in mind. Mm-hmm. You can't stop that.
So you're a Christian nationalist.
I'm a Christian nationalist, I guess. Now, there is a group, and if you go on Amazon, you'll find it. There is a group of intellectuals, a group of academics, Christian academics, that are trying to promote some positive version of Christian nationalism. Now, I've never read any of the books. There have been a couple of books that have been published recently. One of the guys is a recognizable name, but I should have looked it up before the show, and I completely forgot. But he writes a book that says that it's something we need, but I haven't read the book, so I I really can't critique the book. I don't know exactly what form of it he's talking about. In fact, maybe I should look it up. It's Christian Nationalism.
There have been a couple books lately because it's a hot topic.
It is a very hot topic, and so you've gotten.
But listen, Christians have a responsibility to advocate for a biblical worldview, not to force others to follow it. We can't force others to follow Jesus, so to speak, but we're called.
Stephen Wolfe.
Oh, okay.
He writes a book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. Stephen Wolfe, and he is. He's talking. It says evangelical elites and the progressive media complex want you to think that Christian nationalism is hopelessly racist, bigoted, and an idol for right-wing Christians. Is Christian nationalism the golden calf of the religious right, or is it the only way forward? And Stephen Wolfe, it doesn't tell me who he is. I'd have to look him up, I guess.
Yeah, there's a group that think the church should just shut up.
Oh,
stay in there.
Canon Press. Okay. That's Doug Wilson's.
That makes a lot.
Yeah, so that makes sense that there would be a book like this on.
So there's a lot who think that the church needs to just be quiet, stay in their churches, not give their opinion, but then the world slowly encroaches upon our theology, right, and then tells us that we're political if we address it.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens over and over again. But yeah, we are.
So, and the religious left is allowed to say, well, Jesus said love everybody, but I'm not allowed to say Leviticus says a man shall not lie with a man.
See, nope.
That's Christian nationalism. Or Paul saying they gave up their natural desire for women and lusted after each other.
Yeah, no,
I'm not allowed to say that. No,
that verse, no.
So you see,
but I guess, you're not judged, you can say that one.
I guess that we can, we're just kind of pointing out the hypocrisy of it, right? Yeah. That you're couching your argument against religious involvement in the public square by using religious language, and by co-opting the Christian faith. And I just love it when, every cult that's ever been started is started by a guy or a group of guys who say, "Oh, nobody ever saw this before." I had a professor in seminary who said, if you come up with an idea that nobody's ever talked about before, don't talk about it because you're probably wrong. And that's the same thing with the post, it's the 19th century, right? It's that period, the higher criticism of the text and so on and so forth that came out of the German school. That's what that was the root of liberal Christianity, or the liberal movement in Christianity. And here again, it's been 1900 years. The church has believed essentially the same thing for 1900 years. But you figured it out. All those dumb idiots before. The church fathers were brilliant, by the way. I mean, you might be able to say the apostles were not that smart.
They weren't as enlightened as us, Jack.
They weren't as enlightened as us, yeah. But they were brilliant, right? I mean, you read Augustine. You read Gregory. You read... why am I forgetting his name? Golden Mouth there. Chrysostom, right? You read these guys, they were some of the smartest people history's ever had. But it took 1900 years for the real smart guys to figure it out. Yeah. And so you're using all of that and you're saying everybody...
And everybody today knows Greek better than anybody who actually spoke Greek.
Yeah, right. And so it just drives me nuts. And it's just a bunch of garbage and a bunch of hypocrisy. Listen, if you like the stuff we're talking about and the way we're approaching it, you have a Christian ministry, or maybe you're a Christian who owns a business, or you're the pastor of a church, or maybe you have a Christian podcast or something else that you're doing, and you want us to promote what you're doing, you can do that by sponsoring an episode of our podcast. Send us $20, and we'll go ahead and advertise your ministry, your business, your event even, or your podcast or what you're doing. Email us at jesusagendapodcast@gmail.com, jesusagendapodcast@gmail.com, and give us the copy that you want us to read as part of that advertisement. You could also, if you wanted to, you could also send some audio yourself, and we could plug it in, or if you have a video you want to send, we could plug it into the YouTube video side. So we're going to move into an area that I really love. My son and I, my younger son, is very interested in science. I've always been kind of a science buff, but I'm of that age, and I'm slightly older than Steve Mannion here. I'm of that age that I grew up reading Popular Science magazine and stuff like that. So, I'm still waiting for the flying cars, but I have a feeling they're right around the corner. But I really like real science too. And my son is very much into it. He says he's in 9th grade this year. He's been saying for a few years, he's either going to go into paleontology or archaeology or something like that. So we're always talking science stuff. And we run into this thing where, people think that science and Christian faith, they're just not compatible. You cannot be open to science as a method of understanding truth and be a Christian. And in a lot of ways they think, we're closed-minded. We don't want to explore things and ask too many questions because it might just disprove what we believe. I don't find that personally. What I affirm scientifically does not affect in a negative way my faith, and I don't believe my faith has negatively affected what I'm willing to affirm scientifically.
Well, bottom line, they don't conflict. There's an error somewhere, either in science or in how we are interpreting it, or in how we are reading the Bible. If we see there's a conflict, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, that's the first thing.
The two books, right?
Yeah, that's the first thing you got to do. Is
Scripture and creation.
Is know that there's not a conflict. There's a problem with how we're viewing either the data or the scriptures.
Right. Mm-hmm. And there are multiple groups of Christians now that are engaging in, I guess, what they would call science apologetics, maybe, or science-based ministry. Mm-hmm. Most of us, and they represent, there are multiple groups, but they fall into 3 categories, mostly based on what they think of Genesis 1, right? Mm-hmm. Genesis 1 and 2. And I guess Genesis 6 through 9 as well, because the flood would be part of that. So you have your young earth creationist groups, people like Answers in Genesis, Creation Ministries International, You probably know that Ken Ham's the head of Answers in Genesis. He built a gigantic ark. We went and visited it. We've been there.
I would love to go there.
Yeah, we've been there twice actually now. We went, I was still pastoring a church in North Carolina the first year they opened it. And get this for their special. They did a special the first 40 days and nights where the tickets were basically half off. Mm. So you got entrance to the park, the ark, which was hard. I mean, the ark was there, but the rest of the park was hardly there. And you also got tickets to the Creation Museum. So we took a group of people from church and we did that. And then just recently we went to St. Louis, and I brought my mother-in-law. Somewhere along the line we picked up my mother-in-law. And on our way home, we stopped so she could see it. So it was kind of cool to see the difference between the now and of course going in, I'm saying, listen, there's a particular view of this boat. I mean, it's great to look at this giant boat, but when you go in, the science things that are in here are totally not in line with mainstream science. So you have that's young earth creationism. A lot of fundamentalists are part of that, but even folks that are not fundamentalists, right? And then you have old earth creationism.
And these are all in the realm of orthodoxy.
Right, these are all within the realm of orthodoxy.
You can believe these, all of these. And
all 3 of these you can believe and be fine, because none of this has to do with salvation. I think, and I'll add the caveat to that. There's one caveat I think makes it problematic. But so you have young earth, then you have old earth creationism, represented probably the best by Hugh Ross and Fazl Rana, who's, I'm probably screwing up his name. They had Reasons to Believe ministry, which is a great ministry. I've actually met them at apologetics conferences.
That's the gap theory and the day age theory, or that.
Yeah, I don't think they wouldn't really describe it as, but yeah, that's kind of like that. They wouldn't necessarily describe it. What they would say is the day is actually a whole epoch of creation. So
yeah, that's the day age.
From there, is that the day age theory? So the gap theory is just millions of years between the days,
between
like literal
24-hour days. Genesis 1-2.
Oh, is that how it works?
Gap,
see, I thought it was like day 1, and then there's a gap of millions of years in day 2.
Yeah, that's the day age theory. Each day represents an age.
Each day represents an age.
The gap theory is a big gap in between Genesis.
So I know they wouldn't describe it that way, and I know there's some subtle differences, and I'm just not well enough versed on what they have. RTB is the only group between the young Earth and the old Earth. RTB is the group, at least they boast, that they have a testable creation model. And they've written numerous times on it. And every time there's like some new discovery, they go back and say, our model predicted this. And this is the way that our model predicted it. So I find that to be kind of interesting. And Hugh Ross, I've heard him speak. He's very boring. He's not as exciting as like Ken Ham. Ken Ham was definitely...
He's a good communicator.
Yeah, he's a great communicator.
And Hugh Ross has an accent.
And Hugh Ross is not. I mean, he's very much an academic. He's an astrophysicist. You know, talk about having your head in the clouds. You know what I mean? And but the stuff that they have is really good. I was waiting for that. But Fazl Rana, he's a decent speaker, and he's kind of the face of the organization now. So that's your second group. And then your third group is theistic evolution or evolutionary creationism. This is, as far as I know, only, bless you, only represented by BioLogos, which was started by Dr. Francis Collins, who was, I think, appointed to the head of the National Institutes of Health by 3 separate presidents, including Trump. He also was the guy who mapped out the human genome. He led the team.
So he's pretty dumb.
Yeah. He mapped out the human genome. He wrote a book called The Language of God, where he describes how evolution, contrary to what young earth creationists might say, that evolution leads you away from faith in God, he showed how evolution actually leads you to faith in God, or how it can. So these are your 3 positions. I do think that there could be, this is just my personal opinion, I do think that, and this is where I'm going to say the 2 problems exist, on the 2 far ends, right? So on young earth creationism side, there is a problem because you are teaching things that mainstream science does not teach. Now, if it's true, it's true. Who knows? But it's like 99.5% of every other scientist on the planet, including Christian Science, does not accept it. So if you're raising your kids that way, that's your prerogative. There's nothing wrong with that. But you just need to know they should know the other theories. You should, at least, I'm a homeschool parent, you should be teaching them the other theories, even if you don't accept them, just so they're not left out in the cold, because young earth creationism doesn't exist anywhere in academia. On the other end of it, the only theological problem that I see with evolutionary creationism is if Adam and Eve were not literal people. Now, there's a way for that to be fit in very nicely with an evolutionary model, but if you say that they were somehow, metaphorical and not an actual couple of 2 people who did commit a sin, that then you run into all kinds of problems later down the line, because what do you even do with what Paul says about in Adam all die and in Christ all are raised
because death
again?
would have started with them.
Yeah.
So
I don't even know that. Spiritual death would have started with them. I don't know that physical death would have started.
Well,
with them,
that's the position.
And there would be sort of an argument. There is an argument between old Earth and young Earth on whether or not that's referring to spiritual or physical death. I personally don't think it's physical death, because if it had been the case, then they would have died right after they ate the apple. So I do think that it's spiritual death. But where it becomes a problem for me is if you run into somebody who says, yeah, Adam and Eve just weren't, it's just it's a rhetorical tool of the writer of Genesis. So those are the 2 problems with the 2 far end theories. But you can hold any of these theories, and there are
bottom line, none of us were there.
None of us were there, right? And the reality is that if you're going to the question of do any of these theories prevent Christians from doing good science? And I would say no, they don't. The guy who invented the MRI machine is a young earth creationist, or was he might be dead now, was a young earth creationist. The guy who's been the head of the NIH for the last 12 years, mapped out the human genome, is an evangelical, an Orthodox Bible-believing evangelical Christian. So I don't think that Christian faith stunts your ability to be a scientist.
No, you approach it objectively. You do the hypothesizing, and I'm not a scientist, but I know there's the steps and the repeatability, which we don't have. We can't repeat creation, right. So it's really looking at the information that we do have, and I mean, there even like the radioactive dating and stuff is not a sure. There's a lot of assumptions involved there. I mean, we don't know
like how much
consistent through millions and millions
of
years.
Filling up a tub, right? I think one of the argument I heard was, if you walk into a room and there's a faucet running into a tub and the tub is half full already, how do you know how full the tub was before you came into the room? I don't know. I've heard young Earth creationists.
Well, I mean, there are problems with it. Yeah. Even scientists will acknowledge it. We only know from 50 years of or whatever it is.
Right.
We don't know if the decay is consistent.
Yeah.
We don't know what the starting point was.
Sure.
Stuff like that.
So you definitely have to have for anything old age, you have to rely on is it
there's assumptions.
Uniformitarianism. It has to be uniform throughout all of history.
Yeah.
So you have to make assumptions. Yeah.
And so, but that's part of science, right?
Right.
So,
absolutely.
So I think Paul, when he talked, this is a perfect example, I think, about don't get caught up in useless controversies. I'm not saying this is
endless
useless.
genealogies.
But you don't divide over these things, and you don't divide with brothers over these kind of things. You don't get so caught up in it that it becomes an obsession.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to get 100% certainty on exactly how old the earth is and exactly how it all came to be. So
right. And if you start saying that somebody's not a Christian because they hold a particular view on creation, then you've overstepped it. I have a very close friend. In fact, he's my best friend. He lost a church because he was not a young earth creationist.
Oh yeah, there's churches that require their pastors
but here's the thing, though. In his particular case, it was not a requirement of the denomination, and it was written in none of the documents of the church. There just happened to be one family who was a cornerstone family. This is my church, that family, that taught Sunday school, and he was participating in a youth activity, and they went around the room talking about this, for whatever reason it was a topic of conversation. And he said, well, yeah, I affirm that evolution is the way God created. This family got a hold of that, and they made it their mission to get rid of him. And he's an excellent pastor. He was an excellent pastor there. It caused a division in the church, and, these cannot be, unless, of course, for example, from the Lutheran perspective, the Missouri Synod, they require you to say that you're young earth creationists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's in their denominational. Now, I don't know I never really understood how that works out congregationally, because congregations technically they're not autonomous, but it's congregational polity. But all the pastors are ordained by the LCMS. Mm-hmm. So they must have to sign some document that says that they accept young earth creationism. Mm. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. So we're going to close that up. Before we end the show, though, I wanted to just touch on something that I hadn't had a chance to share it with Steve yet. But I got this email talking about, very optimistic emails, just swinging back around to politics. But I wanted us to talk about a couple of these things. I want to go through all of them. There's 10 of them. And then maybe we can pick one or two to talk about. And this guy says, this guy's a Christian. He's a pastor. He says, Trump has a 10-point plan to dismantle the deep state. And we heard about some of this on the campaign trail, but we kept hearing about it in a very negative light, right? So here's some of it. 1, restoring presidential authority to remove corrupt officials. And I love how Pastor Fisk throws in the Proverbs. Proverbs 25:5, remove the wicked from the king's presence, and his throne will be established through righteousness. He says Trump wants to bring back the power to clear out those who are working against the nation's interests. Now, having been a civil servant myself, having to take a civil service test and all that kind of stuff, that's what some of this is about. There are some positions in the federal government that can either be appointed or can be civil service class. And so what I think this has to do with is taking these positions that are currently under the civil service class and moving them over to an appointment class, which means you don't get any of the civil service protections. I worked in civil service, and let me just tell you something. There's a lot of people who should not be working in the government. Mm-hmm. And the only reason they're there is because they scored something on a test. And I'm not anti-union. I'm actually pretty pro-union. But because they belong to a union and they scored on a test, they get to keep their job, and they're crap employees, and they work against their employer all the time. This rule would make it so the administration can go in and wipe out those positions and make them appointed positions. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a good move.
My only thing is I get a little bit nervous because, in Israel where it said, and Israel wanted a king.
Yeah, I don't want a king.
I know, but sometimes there's a desire for somebody just to come in and strong arm clean everything out.
Yeah,
that's not the American system.
Well, but it would still be because
I know. I'm saying I'd want to know what he means by that.
Yeah,
right. You don't want to start giving presidential power that isn't
well, this is going to be right. This would be stuff under the executive office.
Right. So I'm very strict on constitutionality.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't care how bad the issue is.
So this would be like the bureaucracy is what it's.
I know, but that's important to clarify.
It needs to be needs to be clarified. Firing corrupt actors in national security and intelligence, reforming the FISA courts, establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which would help the nation heal from hidden government actions, cracking down on government leaks, making the Inspector General offices independent, implementing independent audits of intelligence agencies. I like that one. Relocating the federal bureaucracy outside of D.C. I don't know how they would get their jobs done, but I like the idea. Banning federal bureaucrats, this is a big one for me, from working in related private sectors. They can't go after they're done and be lobbyists and work all the people that they know on the Hill. Because have you ever seen the movie about cigarettes? Did you ever see that? What was the name of it? Where it was all about the cigarette lobby, the tobacco lobby. I'll get you the title of it because I can't think of the main guy in it is recognizable, but he's not like a big actor. But it really just, and it was, I know it was partially propaganda, right? But it definitely opened up my eyes to the dirty business of lobbyists and what they do. So, and then Kennedy, implementing Kennedy's health and environmental vision. I don't agree with everything. Kennedy has said some pretty wacky stuff, but he's also said some really smart stuff. And, I'd love to see him get in with the CDC and the FDA and maybe clean some of that stuff up. And Musk will be given a mission for smaller government and freer speech.
That alone, man, they get the spending.
And he wants to bring back the World Fair. Did you know that?
No.
I had never heard that until today.
They could cut expenses just by not just doing to their buddies, like buddy contracts and stuff. Yeah. And there's stuff he will be able to drop costs.
What if we, look, I wouldn't say I'm a libertarian. I'm not, right? I think I have some libertarian leanings in certain ways. I'm very much about, the constitutionality of things. But how about decreasing our military footprint all over the world? Why do we still have, multiple bases in Europe that we don't need? I mean, I could see keeping Ramstein as long as we're going to be active in the Middle East and that theater, but why do we need some? Like
we think we're the world's police.
Why do we need all that? Why not dismantle that?
I've never been a war hawk. I've always been like,
Yeah, me neither. I don't think we need to send troops.
We're not the world's police.
I don't think we need to go send boots on the ground and every time there's a conflict all over the place. I'm much more. I want the military to be
something
built
literally
up.
Threatens us.
Right.
Of course.
I want the military to be built up for that purpose. I want the people who serve in our military to be well taken care of. But I don't think we need to have as big a footprint as we have, as we've had, which really started, World War II and forward, right? But do we really need all these bases? So how much money could we save if we dismantle? Ron Paul's been saying that for years, right? How much money could we save in just getting rid of that alone? And the bureaucratic red tape. How much money could we save with the bureaucratic red tape? There's a ton of it out there. Well, listen, we hope you enjoyed this show. We talked a little bit about politics, a little bit more about politics than we did the last couple of weeks. Talked about the election results, what that means, who and what really lost. Then we talked about the religious left and their hypocrisy and calling out Christian nationalism and what Christian nationalism really is. And then lastly, we started talking about science and faith and how those two things really don't need to be in opposition to one another. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, like the Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube page, and the best way you can help us get more listeners is to send this episode out by email or by text message to all your friends and encourage them to listen as well. Until then, we'll see you again next week.